G'day, John for Thehotend. This is part 2 of the Anycubic 4Max Pro 3D printer. As mentioned in part 1 of this 2-part series, this second part is all the little, not faults so much as quirks of this printer. My opinion doesn't change, it's a great printer. So just have a look at these few things and see what you think. Okay, this is the Anycubic 4Max Pro. Take a listen. That's the little intro screen. Now check this out. Loud, isn't it? And note the blue light at the back there. Fortunately, in the menus, you can turn the light on and off. That's off, although you can't see it. That's on. And here's the best bit. Turn that sound off. Gone. Beauty. No more annoying sound. Right. Next thing is changing filament on this machine. Do not use the add filament or change filament options in the menu. Just do it this way. Heat the hot end, push it down a little bit, and then rip it out. That is it's the only way to take the filament out of this printer. You have to get that push down piece first, otherwise you will have all sorts of problems with the knob on the end of the filament. Trust me, I know. You've got to pull the whole extruder apart to fix it. With the change filament options in the menu, it doesn't do that first downward push and it creates problems. So just do it this way. It's no big deal. Make sure you nip that little bud off the end. Then you can wind it out through the feed tube. Now it's not a Bowden, it's just a feed tube. That little sound was the filament runout sensor. Grab your new filament, and as you should always do when you can't find the end of the filament, pull off some loose spools across the edge of the spool until you get a single line of filament, and then roll it back up. You should do this automatically, no matter if it's a new roll, old roll, whatever. Then you won't have any tangles in your filament halfway through a print. Okay. Again, get your clippers. Make sure there's no knob on the end of the filament. I always cut at about a 45-degree angle just so it feeds through better. Hang the spool on the spool holder on the back. Feed it up through the filament runout sensor till it comes out this end. There we go. Straighten it out a little bit. And stick it in the hole in the top of the extruder and push it down. Pulling back on the spring, of course. Push it right down until you see the filament that you're loading come through the nozzle. Pop that back down and you're done. Filament's changed. Now this one is interesting. See in the specifications where I've marked, it says the build size is 270 by 205. Okay. 270 on the X, yep, that's right. And on the Y, 205 we're looking for. What? 240 on the Y. What's going on here? Now I'll show you why. Here's the printer printing away, and oh dear, the power's about to go off. There it goes. Now the power's going to come back on again. There it is. Now the printer reheats the bed and the nozzle, as it would normally do on any printer that has a power fail restart feature. It homes the X, it homes the Y, and hang on, it also homes Z. That's why you've got that extra piece of bed depth, so that the X gantry doesn't crash into your print when it homes on the Z. Never seen that before. You'd think they'd be able to fix that by just homing X and Y and not Z. But anyway, it is what it is. Now we get into the big problem that I had with the printer that I have. I don't know whether it's unique to my printer or not, but as you can see, it's set to 210 and my thermometer says 225. In fact, it was closer to 235. So the hot end was much, much hotter than the LCD was saying. Right, we're now going to pull apart the extruder and hot end. Don't worry about that splash on top, it was just a little bit of ABS that I slipped with. So first remove the filament. Now this temperature problem caused me all sorts of worries with blockages and clogs and you name it. Because, as I said in the first video, when I thought I was printing at 250, I was actually printing at closer to 280, and that destroyed the ptfe tubing in the hot end. So after pulling this thing apart probably 20 or 30 times, the penny dropped that what was causing the problem, and I was able to fix it. Now, I'm not saying that all the 4Max Pros have this problem. I've contacted Anycubic, but they haven't got back to me at the time of making this video. But the cause of it is the thermistor in the hot end is not set properly in the firmware. They've got it set wrong. So either the firmware is wrong or the thermistor is wrong. So here we go, that top comes off. 4 screws holding it on, as you saw, 2 from the top at the back, 2 from the front underneath. There's your 2 fans, and that's your thermistor, and that's your hot end heater. So we're going to remove those, just unplug them. I have to use pliers because my fat fumbly fingers can't get in there to get them out. Just be careful if you use pliers, you don't want to pull the wire out of the plug. Okay, they're disconnected. Fortunately with this printer, they send you a whole new hot end as a spare part in the bag. So I used that and again had the heating problems. This is the only screw that holds the hot end to the extruder. Do not undo it too much. It goes into a captive nut, and if you unscrew it too much, that nut will drop, and you've got to pull everything apart to find it. You only have to loosen it, and then the hot end is loose. Grotty looking hot end and nozzle because I haven't cleaned it. And then from the top, move these wires out of the way. and this top piece just lifts up like that. You can see the hole to the extruder. The whole piece just lifts straight off, and as you can see, and I'll be pointing this out several times, it's only held by one screw. So just push the wires through that little cavity there and the whole thing comes out. And there we go, that's the unit, and that's exactly the same as the unit that you get as a spare part, complete like that. And you'll see the ptfe tubing sticking out the top. Okay, now we're going to show you how to pull that apart. Pretty straightforward. The wiring to the heater element and to the thermistor and the cooling fins. Now the cooling fins are a separate part to the actual heat break. So the first thing we do is remove those. There's a little set screw in there. We loosen that off. And that just slides up and off, okay? Nothing complicated so far. So there's the heat break going into the heat block and the nozzle. Now I'd pre-loosened that nozzle, that's why it was hanging out so far. That just comes out, and then this one just comes out. You'll find a lot of printers have the same system as this. They might not look identical, but the system is the same. The ptfe tubing, oh dear, there's a blockage. That's actually ABS blocked in there. And you can see that it's taking up space where the tubing should be. That's because the tubing got overly hot and was able to be pushed. Now the length of this tubing is critical on this printer because, as I said, it's only held in place with that one screw, and the extruder itself is what holds that tubing down into the hot end. And if the length is too short, it's going to have free play and therefore movement up and down. So as you can see, it's just a tick over 2 inches. That is critical. It can be maybe 1 millimetre longer, but definitely not shorter. So now we're going to clear out this ABS that's sitting in the heat break. Maybe. Push, push. No, it ain't moving. It's stuck in there. So that's no problem. And here I'm just demonstrating that the ptfe tubing is supposed to go right through, and in this case it's got that blockage there and it can't go right to the end. So we get a little stove lighter, cigarette lighter, whatever you've got. Sorry about the focus. Just warm up that heat break a little and push it out, plonk. This is the piece that was stuck in that tube. It's no wonder I was getting clogs and under extrusions. That thing is massive. Okay, we can now clean out that tube. It's cooled down a bit now, I can hang on to it. And we can reinsert the ptfe tubing. Well, nope, we can't. There's still stuff stuck inside that tube. I couldn't even see it, but there's a little bit still in there. So we go back to our little probe and give it a good clean out. You can see those little specks down there, that's what was still stuck in it. Okay, reinsert that tubing. And bingo, success, it goes all the way through. Now remember that that threaded part on that heat break is inside the heat block. So whatever temperature you've got the printer set at, that's the temperature that that PTFE tubing is going to have. Now PTFE breaks down over about 255 degrees. So that's what was causing my problem. Now we just screw that back into the heat block. Now I've gone all the way down there, and you'll see in a moment that the PTFE tubing now will go right through. There it goes, right through out where the nozzle would screw in. Now I don't recommend being this rough on PTFE tubing because you need those ends beautifully square and clean. So I'm using pliers there to pull it out. That's not a good idea, but I'll show you why later on. Okay, we screw the nozzle in and oh, it only goes that far. That's because it's now tight against that heat break. But we want the nozzle further up, so we just unscrew the heat break a bit. And now we can screw that nozzle in further. Okay, unscrew a bit more and in. So we're now confident that that heat break is hard up against the top of the nozzle, and always leave a little bit of a gap between the nozzle and the heat block. And I'll show you why a bit further on. Okay, so we've got that as tight as we can go, just with fingers. And we're now confident that that PTFE tubing goes all the way in through the heat break and touching the top of the nozzle. Just give it a couple of twists just to make sure. Now I'll pull it out and show you. There it is, all the way down through the heat break, and that end of the PTFE will be touching the nozzle. No gaps that can fill up with goop. Okay, now we can put the cooling fins back on. They just slot in there like that. Now it's important that the hot end goes in the right way. The wires come out the right hand side. Okay, so we turn that so that that flat part up there, you'll see where it's got a round indentation. That's where the screw that holds everything together that we loosened earlier holds the hot end unit. So that has to be at the front. So there we are, all cleaned up, ready to reinstall. Now, you'll notice the PTFE is no longer white, it's blue. That's because I've replaced that tubing with some Capricorn tubing, which is about 10 times the price, but has a higher heat capability. So we're not going to have any problems anymore. There's the thermistor sitting in the hot end, in the heat block. Now I also changed the thermistor. I took out the one that was in there and put a new one in that I had here. There's the little hole that you loosen the set screw. This uses the system where the thermistor sits in a little brass tube so that you can't break the thermistor with the holding screw. Okay, we can now reverse the process and put the thing back in. Okay, we've got our little piece at the front, our wires coming out the right hand side. Yeah, we saw it, it's okay. Put it in the hole. Okay, poke the wires up through the cavity where we took them out. Poke the tubing up through the hole. Now there's a little indent in the bottom of that black plastic carriage that the cooling fins fit into, and you have to make sure that that's up tight. See, it's not yet. It's got to go all the way in. There it goes. It's just clicked into where it should be. Okay, making sure that that flat piece is at the front and the wires are going to come out the back. Lovely. Yes, all right, we saw that. That's where the screw holds it on. I'm pointing it out again because it's very important. Okay, now we can put our extruder back on. Make sure the fans sit nicely on their ducts and that sits. Now that unit is actually what's holding that tubing from being able to move. Those wires, it's important that they come out the back and are not trapped or pinched anywhere, because that would make the top not sit properly. So we've got that sitting nice and square and tight. I'm holding on to the heat block underneath to keep that tight up underneath and retightening that screw, that single screw that holds the whole thing together. And we're making sure that that extruder part, the top part, is firm down on that ptfe tubing. Make sure it's nice and square and tight, doesn't flop about anywhere, because if it does, you haven't got it in right. And the same goes with the hot end. Make sure that's nice and firm. Now you can plug your wires back in. They only go one way, or well, technically they only go one way, so that's fine. If you forced it, you could put them in wrong, but it wouldn't matter. There's no positive, negative on either of those. Now I would have liked to have been able to run this without the cover on it so I could see what was going on better. But I noticed that the cover itself, yes, everything's nice and tight, move on. The cover itself is what activates the X limit switch, just that flat side of the cover activates the switch which is up in there. So you have to have the cover back on, or you would have to make up something that would activate that switch. So make sure it sits properly, none of the wires are in the way or nothing's pinched. And we just reverse by putting all the screws back in. There's only 4. There's a little tube underneath that you've got to get that screw up into. I'll show it to you in a sec. Just got to feel around for the hole, and you'll feel when it starts to take up. Yep, do the other side, and it's on. So there's the tube underneath in the plastic that you've got to stick your hex wrench with the screw on it up into that hole. So there's our hot end sitting up there nicely, and now that gap that I told you about, we need to heat up the whole system and just give it a little tweak of a tighten. You'll see the whole thing is moving around slightly, and now we know that we're not going to have any filament leaks from the top of the heat block or from the nozzle. Alright, that's it fixed. Once it's done, you can print stuff like this. I'm a big Freddy fan. This model is on Thingiverse, I think, from the Scan the World series. And that printer's in PLA. I love this printer, I really do. For a $299 printer, that's ABS. It is fantastic. Please, whether we had any links or not, just get yourself one. It's a great printer. See you next time.